Today's guest on the Human Yoga podcast is Carolyn Williams, science journalist and author of two excellent books I've just read, Move and In a Sense. She's contributed to numerous magazines, etc. And I'm really, really happy to have you on the podcast, Carolyn. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I neglected to say, also a practitioner of Ashtanga Yoga in Guildford.
Yes, so, I'm gonna flash the T-shirt for Mark and Clive.
She's got the T-shirt on,
representing for the Guildford Yoga.
So, I suppose I'm going to start off with the most obvious place. Where were the first findings of the body's impact on the mind? Because this is relatively recent, I believe, with people like William James and maybe Jung and people like that. So, almost 20th century, right? Before that, we had Descartes and people were saying, no, they're completely different and it's the mind only. And so this is quite a new sphere, even still, isn't it?
Yeah, it sort of is within neuroscience. And there's been, as you say, sort of some times throughout history, William James, so the James Lang theory of emotion came around sort of 1884, I think it was, which was the idea that you don't feel scared and then your heart starts beating, you feel scared because your heart starts beating. But at the time, that really wasn't taken very seriously because everyone thought, well, that's all too slow. This is like, the really fascinating, the really fast and impressive stuff happens in the brain. And the brain is in charge and the brain tells what you have to do and it interprets. And then, so it's been and gone. And then Antonio Damasio and Bud Craig, two scientists, sort of started looking at why sort of everything from consciousness to perception of time to how you feel in a moment has a lot to do with the sensations and the signals that are coming from the body. And then at the same time, we had a shift in neuroscience that was talking about how we perceive the world using our external senses and our internal senses. It's not that the body does stuff and the brain interprets and gives instructions. It's a back and forth loop. So the brain is constantly predicting what it thinks is happening in the outside world and then comparing that to incoming evidence and then changing if necessary. And so in terms of the internal signals, what that means is it's perfectly fast enough because you've got this back and forth going all the time. And what the predictions are saying, what the body is saying, if they clash, then sometimes that comes to the surface as a conscious feeling. So these things all came together to the point where we are now, where we now think, okay, well, this is it makes perfect sense because we know how the brain works, or we don't know, but this is a very leading theory in how the brain works. We don't know, nobody knows how the brain works, but we have a pretty good idea that it's making these predictions all the time. And that opens up the idea that, okay, so it's working on more information than we had taken into account. And the mind isn't just from the neck up, it's built on the foundations of what's going on throughout the whole body.
So the mind isn't operating as a kind of sole trader, as it were, is actually receiving a lot of influence from outside. But I mean, nevertheless, something comes to mind. How much do you think that the mind is just deciding for itself on the bodily signals? Right? It may be massively changeable, but their mind decides, well, this means this, right? So then you get kind of caught, and this is how I very much got into yoga, kind of caught in this feedback loop of feeling that there was something in the energy of the body that was stuck, and the mind was just going around in circles, and treating the same experiences, the different experiences the same, right? So it just doesn't.
There is some. So I took part in a really quite interesting, but also slightly disturbing experiment in my research for it, in a sense. So I went to a lab in Tulsa, in Oklahoma, and they did various things to me. One of which was they got me breathing through a snorkel, which was attached to an oxygen tank. And they could change the flow of air. So sometimes it was harder to take a breath in, in a perfectly safe way, but it didn't feel very nice. And sometimes it was completely full flow. And the experiment was designed to test, what your expectations have to do with what you actually sense. And so they sort of did a little training period where they played a particular tone, which was then followed by a hard breath, and a different tone, which was followed by an easy breath. And then, we did that for a little while, and they switched it up without telling me. And so my job was to take a breath, and then they'd say, did you expect that to be a difficult breath? And did you feel it to be a difficult breath? Yes or no? The kind of skip to the end thing about it is, like, a third of the time, because I'd associated a particular tone with an easy breath, if I heard that tone, it would feel easy even when it wasn't. And vice versa. So I'd feel something was difficult when it wasn't. So the brain's expectations play a role. And this experiment was designed to look at how quickly can people shift their allegiance when the evidence from the body changes. And some people seem better able to flexibly change and go, okay, something's changed, this is fine now. And other people stick with the hard-won lessons of the past. And so this is relevant to things like PTSD and anxiety disorders. So it's almost like when there's a clash, what do you believe? And if you always go, no, I've learnt this the hard way and the brain is right, then that can do you a disservice. So yeah, that was really fascinating to me. My brain was very stubborn. Yeah.
I mean, just in service of the book, there's many examples of these in Carolyn's books where she goes, I mean, a bit James Nestor-like, really. He does similar in Breathe, right? He going and putting herself under these experiments to find out what happens when you do X, Y, and that's really, really fun in part of the book. So yeah, I mean,
it's fun to do as well. That's my favorite bit. Get out there, and the scientists are always really sort of apologetic. They're, oh, I'm so sorry you're doing this, and I'm like, no, more, give me more. This is great fun. I was swallowing vibrating tablets, and I mean, the most fun was going in the flotation tank. Yeah, that was kind of chill. So that was lovely. But I love having a go. Yeah.
Tablets also, imagine swallowing. I mean, in the book, she mentions swallowing this tablet that's, vibrating all the time. So as it goes down in the stomach, it's still vibrating. And then at a certain point, I thought, I don't know whether I feel rather panicked at a certain point because they can't switch it off, right? I mean, it does have a certain duration, but if you suddenly feel there's this thing vibrating, very uncomfortable, and you kind of can't get rid of it, I sort of thought like, well, that might actually worry me a little bit.
Well, it was a very sort of strange feeling. So it felt a little bit like if you had your phone on vibrate and you had it in a backpack, and you were carrying it around, you could feel it vibrating. But it was like that, but inside.
You might quite like that.
And it was odd. So they had two different intensities. So this is looking at gut sensations and how that feeds into everything from eating behaviors to like anxiety, and lots of things are tied to the gut. And so yes, there are two settings, and one of them it felt like there was an angry bee inside you going, "Grrr," and that was very obvious. Another one, it was sort of more subtle, and it wasn't. You thought, am I imagining it? Is it really there or not? And it was very strange. But it was then there. I think I can't even remember how long. It wasn't that long, and then it dies and switches off, and then you assume it goes out. Come out the other end. But yeah.
I'm kind of going quite naturally here. It wasn't the way I wanted to structure the questions, but I mean, on that front, you mentioned the tablet and the use of sometimes in eating disorders to make people that feel very uncomfortable swallowing food feel somewhat different about that. Yeah, I mean, do you want to speak a little bit about the gut and its relationship to interoception? But we have to go back and slightly just define interoception, because that was kind of the obvious question. And really the heart of Carolyn's book is this word, interoception. And then maybe speak about that on the gut, and we can try and piece our way back to a step
sorry, I tend to go off on. Stop me, and move me on. So interoception, it's a horrible word. It needs rebranding, really, but it's quite simple. It's basically the ability to sense and make sense of, and sense and interpret signals and messages from inside the body. So you've got ones that you can tune into consciously, but you're most usually aware of them when sort of the bottom-up signals become stronger. So, for example, when your heart rate rises, when you're hungry, when you need to go to the loo, there's all these ones. But you can, in theory, your breathing sensations as well, which is more relevant to yoga. You can tune into them, but you're more, you sort of will become aware of them if your body thinks it's important. Then there's the ones sort of at a different level, which are sort of on the border between consciousness and unconsciousness. So I think of them like sort of background music in a movie. So sometimes, the music changes subtly when you're watching a film and you feel uneasy and you're not really sure why, but something has changed. There's some of these things in your body that happen, whether that's fatigue, whether it's inflammation, some of these things might be going on, mild unease with your situation that you're in. So this is sort of like, these are the interoceptive sensations that guide your behavior in ways that you aren't necessarily aware of. And then there's the ones we don't need to worry about too much, because the brain deals with them unconsciously, like, what's my liver doing today? What's my kidneys doing today? So interoception describes the sort of the sensations that that are relevant to our survival. They're homeostatic signals, basically. They're saying something ain't right, you need to do something about it. So that's sort of why it's so important for our mood, behavior, feelings, everything.
Yeah, like an inner I mean, most people have heard now proprioception, which is, I guess, the body's feeling of space outside it or relation to that space.
Yeah, it's like where you are in relation. Yeah, where your body is in space is proprioception.
Yeah,
Whereas
so interoception
is fully personal. You know, you're the only one that can feel your interoceptive signals. And they are important because they tell you something about how you are faring in the world. You know, how am I doing, and what do I need to do, if anything, to make things better?
Yeah. So going back to that point we made about the racing heart and the interpretation of the body signals, one assumes then, vis-a-vis your book, is that once one gets more intelligent with interoception, then that racing heartbeat may not be a signal for fight or flight. It may not be a challenge. It may just be like, you've been running in the gym. But I mean, many people.
It's the interpretation that's important as well. Because one thing that, it's tempting to think, everyone should be more sensitive to what's going on inside their body. That's not necessarily the case. So, if you have an anxiety disorder, it's not that you want to be more aware of your heart. It's more the sort of interpretation of it. And so some research has been about learning to more accurately tune into what the heart's doing at a lower level, so that when it starts, so you're more sensitive to any change. So when it starts ramping up, it doesn't have to get to the point of panic before you notice. So it's about noticing and sort of putting things into context, and sort of being aware of what you're noticing and what it means. So it's a whole thing. So it's not necessarily as simple as going, right, we should all feel our stomachs, we should all feel our heart,
Yeah, because as you mentioned, sometimes there's an oversensitivity, right? With things like chronic pain, the body's become oversensitized to that interoception signals, or eating disorders. Often, we're going back to that stomach thing that I was mentioning. Like to talk about the idea that the stomach is feeling uncomfortable because any food then feels too much. Yeah, I thought it was interesting.
So
your work on the gut was super interesting.
Yeah, and I was reading about the gut all afternoon yesterday because a big new sort of paper came out about everything, and it's so much bigger than what people already know about. Like people know about the microbiome a bit, and but there's all kinds of stuff that goes on in the gut, and being oversensitive to gut signals is obviously a problem in eating disorders because and it's also the attribution of what that means. So if you're oversensitive to the sensation of having food in your stomach, then you also feel that that's a horrible thing. You feel bloated and it's horrible and you can't stand it. Then that's the problem. So one of the things that's been done for that is flotation tanks. So put people in a flotation tank. It enhances awareness of heart and breathing sensations, but it seems to diminish gut sensations. So people can go in there and sort of not feel so uncomfortable. So there's that. And then the vibrating capsule, I think that this is very experimental at the moment. It's not that they're putting them into people and having great results or anything, but it is showing that people are genuinely more sensitive to gut sensations in a way that may explain some of the other symptoms. Like a lot of people with eating disorders genuinely have problems with their gut, food moving through their gut, and so it's not surprising that they feel uncomfortable. So which came first is uncertain, and how to treat that, I guess, is work in progress. But it is really interesting that there's more going on in there than we think, even down to we have specialized cells in the intestine that the microbes are producing particular chemicals which are then travel via the vagus nerve to the brain, and it's sort of all to do with driving cravings for particular foods. And if those microbes aren't there, you're more likely to crave foods that are pleasurable, whether or not you're hungry. So there's all this stuff going on in there, that these signals that we're not really aware of. And it's the microbes, it's the food, it's what we've learned about food, it's the physical sensations. And there's a whole other world in there.
And then the interpretation, the interpretation of those feelings. Yeah. I mean, I had it myself, actually. I have to say,
exactly.
A number of years ago, I was trying to reduce my diet, and then I carried on reducing it, and I got into like bad territory where I felt like anything I put in felt like it was heavy, So I kind of I don't know how I got out of it, really. I just gradually familiarized myself. I mean, it wasn't to the critical condition, but I lost a lot of weight. Gradually familiarized myself with those uncomfortable sensations, and it kind of got back to normal, But I mean, it felt at the time, I mean, just to try and make sense out of it, it felt at the time that the body was definitely leading the mind, and,
Yeah.
if anyone's been in those situations where you don't feel like you don't have control over yourself, which is a number of times in my life anyway, maybe yours, you do recognize that, yes, it's not like the mind is like this, autonomous robot controlling something. It's like, there's a two-way thing here. And sometimes the signals are bigger than the mind. It does feel like something else is influencing you more than you can decide in your head how to react
Yeah.
to.
And I think this is part of the thing, is that I think because of the kind of the history of, Descartes gets the blame for all of it, but separating brain from body, like, so that's,
he wasn't the first.
Yeah, so he's the one that gets all the flack for it. But like, the way our language is, we talk about body-brain connections, we talk about the mind, the brain, the body, as if, and what we're forgetting is that we are, we're animals. It's all, the only reason the brain is there is to kind of keep track of what's going on in the body, to keep us alive. Without the body, we wouldn't have a brain. And yeah, the idea that they're separate things and they're talking to each other is wrong, but there's no way of talking about it that doesn't sound entirely naff, So, it isn't two things, it's one thing trying to do the same. Yeah.
That's a subtle point, but an excellent point. Yeah. It's not like, exactly as you said.
Nobody came along and bolted the brain on.
The brain. Like the people talk about the stomach as a second brain, or the way that I can feel it in my waters, or it's like there's a sense of more than one literal aspect of the brain that is embodied, that we are embodied after all. What about other signals then? For example, from the heart, you mentioned that you do a lot of studies on the heart. Perhaps the anecdote of the I really liked of the guy who's very sensitive to his heart, that does the was it hostage negotiations?
Hostage negotiator.
That was incredible.
Chris White. He's a really interesting guy to talk to. He doesn't do hostage negotiations anymore, but he did for many, many years. He was a part of the Metropolitan Police in London. So he would be called in when, it was all going horribly wrong and they needed somebody to, calm the situation down and negotiate. And you would think, in that situation, the last thing you want is to be really in touch with your emotions and your feelings. You'd want someone who was calm, rational, cold-headed. But when so Sarah Garfinkel, who is a interoception researcher at UCL in London, she got him to do a heartbeat detection test, which is a common one for interoceptive sensitivity. And a lot of the work's been done on heartbeat because it is, the most accessible. So most people, when you ask them to sit quietly and feel their heartbeat or count their heartbeats in a certain number of amount of time, they're about sort of 60% accurate. Chris White, the hostage negotiator, he was 100%. He's like, boom, yeah. And he said to me, I interviewed him, and he said, well, it sort of surprises me that other people don't really. He said, as I'm sitting here talking to you, I can feel my heart. He said, it's not distracting me, but it's there and I'm aware of it. And he had no idea that other people didn't. And he would say that, he would actually use that in his hostage negotiations. So he'd notice subtle changes in his body that would suggest the conversation is going one way or the other. And he'd use that sort of to decide when to intervene in a conversation. He said, if you go too early, they'll shut down. If you leave it too late, you've missed your window. And he's really sort of sensitive to sort of slight changes. He'll say, your heart will raise, your blood pressure will change. All these, you'll notice this, but you almost don't notice it, but you're using that information. So that's really fascinating as a kind of skill that would be great to have. He did actually say that in other situations when it's not massively under pressure, he said, if you go for dinner with a bunch of hostage negotiators, he said, don't expect them to decide where to go because they're all just like... They're all so sensitive. They're like, what about this? What about that? Yeah, he said they can't make a decision between them. But when it's all going down and everyone else is panicking, they're like, boom, in the room.
Right.
So yeah, it's quite interesting.
And you mentioned you can feel your heart and you use it to help you sleep. Is that?
Well, I do now. So I'm pretty rank average in terms of being able to feel my heart. But I've spent a fair amount of time sort of listening to my heart over the course of researching the book. And also I go to flotation tanks whenever I can now. I absolutely love it. Right. And so, so now I find that so people vary in where they can feel it and when they can feel it.
Trying to feel my heart now. Can't feel anything, even my hand on the chest. Yeah,
I feel terrible. I'm not very sensitive.
Terribly useless at that. Well,
even in a flotation tank, it sometimes takes half an hour for it to show up, and then it does, and I'm like, oh, hello, there you are, it's lovely. But now when I'm going to sleep, if I lie on my front when I go to sleep, and I can, that's easier to feel it, and so I just tend to sort of listen to it and tune into it as a calming sensation. So one of the ideas of some interoceptive interventions are to help people experience their body signals in a way that is in a situation when they're calm. So it's not that you only feel your heart when you're freaking out. You sort of learn to live in your body as a safe place. And so that's what things like flotation, and I guess yoga nidra and savasana, a little bit being in a flotation tank to me felt a bit like savasana on steroids, really, because rather than trying to sink into a wooden floor, you're actually sinking into the water. So
I think that would scare me.
Familiar some people with don't like it.
No. I mean, the same with the heartbeat, right? I mean, I think it would freak people out, at least first of all, to be aware of the heart. And obviously, we've got HRV, a heart rate variability, that the hearts don't beat equally, and that can also probably freak people out if they recognise that the heart doesn't just go duh, 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 it just goes.
You don't want it to be a metronome.
No, it shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it strikes me a little bit similar what you're saying to understanding the states of arousal. Peter A. Levine, his work talks about going through understanding the symptoms in a different way. You can kind of allowing the heart rate may go up, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have the same awful feelings and situation that are precipitated previously. Right? You can learn to reinterpret.
Exactly. So that's the basis of things like exposure therapy. And so one of the interesting things. So there's a researcher called Hugo Critchley he did a lot of the early work in interoception. So he's done studies that's showing that as the heart is contracting, people become more likely to notice signs of danger. So they're more alert and they're more likely to remember something scary. And I mean, in terms of like your everyday life, that's not that helpful because you can't tell exactly when it's contracting. But they've used it for people with spider phobia in a study, and they're going through exposure therapy. And they found that if they presented pictures of spiders as the heart was contracting, because they had people hooked up to a heart monitor, that sped up their getting over, they sort of supercharged the exposure therapy. So you can use this kind of knowledge of the heart-brain connection to kind of time things right and help people recover faster. That's really interesting.
Hey, have you ever met anyone that could feel it in other parts of the body, like the kidneys or the liver or anywhere else? Has anyone talked about that to you? Right.
No, I mean, there's some things that we just aren't wired for. I think you can. So if you have kidney stones, obviously you're going to feel pain in your kidneys. But no, it's I think a lot of interoception is, on a need to know basis, and we don't consciously need to know that our kidneys are asking for something. I mean, we sort of indirectly do, I suppose, because you have thirst. So if it's like, you're dehydrated, you'll know about it, but not directly because your kidneys are going. So there's some things that nobody can feel, and if you do feel them, it's probably an issue. So
I suppose it was a leading question to the controlling of those kind of normally automatic functions that those yogis that we hear about, right, that could control their heart rate and go into a slumber in a cave and be unearthed after a month and they were still alive, on that kind of thing, right? They could kind of interoception on a whole nother level, perhaps.
Right? I don't know what's going on interoceptively there. I mean, it's almost sort of the other way around. It's sort of mind over
body.
Mind over body.
Yeah. Well, but there's a sensitivity to it. I think your Chris White, if he has that degree of feeling to his heartbeat, perhaps he could start slowing it through his mind.
Maybe, I don't know. I'll ask him when I next speak to him.
Yeah. That's a new. If he needs a new career, because he's finished up. Never know. He could some kind of magician or
yeah. I don't know how useful a skill that is, mine, but
I don't know. He could wrap himself in white and he'd be the new guru.
Grow a beard. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, on a serious note, you talk a lot about the vagus nerve. Everyone's heard about the vagus nerve. As I've interviewed Peter Levine, I've also interviewed Stephen Porges, who explained it, many years ago, and apparently it should be updated now, according to some people. But generally at that time, we understood that the vagus, or at least up to recently, I thought the vagus was just calming, that it was a nerve called a wandering nerve, vagus meaning wandering, and it had a relationship all the way from the head to the stomach area, I think. And that it just was basically there to put us into the parasympathetic nervous system to calm us down. I wonder if you could say some more about the vagus nerve, because I believe it doesn't just do that either.
No, very much not. So that's the thing that we'll talk about engaging the vagus nerve, parasympathetic nervous system, calm everything down. So yes, and it does do that. But so the vagus nerve is a bundle of about sort of 100,000 individual nerves, and only about 20% of them are parasympathetic nerves. The other 80% are sensory nerves, and so they go through the body, connecting in with all the major organs and blood vessels throughout the sort of the viscera. So all the visceral organs on the inside, sort of down to the intestines, they're sending information about what, interoceptive signals from the body to the brain. So, and that there's a lot we don't know about that. So there's a big project I went to see in action in New York, where they're trying to map it. They're trying to make like a subway map of what's going on and where things are going, which organ, what they're sensing when they get there. Because it's not like our external senses. We have eyes which are doing the seeing. Okay, that's kind of fairly easy. We can see that they're wired into the back of the brain. Fine. But when you're talking about stuff going through the body, you don't have particular organs. You have sensory nerves stretching throughout the whole body, and some of them are sensing pressure, some of them are doing temperature, some of them are doing salinity, some of them are looking for toxins. But it's very complex and it's not really understood. But we're starting to, and so the gut, we're starting to find a lot more about the gut now, and in terms of the microbe to gut to brain link goes via the vagus nerve. The inflammation, Kevin Tracy's been doing a lot of work on the sort of inflammatory, you've got the parasympathetic calm down, but you've also got the kind of upward sensory stuff going on and how that fits together. But it's this whole new world that's only just starting to be explored. And there's one researcher, Stephen LeBoys, who said he's described it as sort of the dark matter of the vagus nerve. There are sensors in our bodies that are sensing stuff that we don't know what they're doing, because we know that they're sensors, we know that they're there, but we don't have a reflex to go with it. So we don't know what they're up to. So the body and brain are talking about stuff that we don't even have a clue what's going on. So there's so much to be learned about the vagus nerve. So the idea that we have do X, this will happen, parasympathetic vagus nerve done. Yeah, it's actually far more interesting than that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned in the book that there's light receptors in fat. So they don't go via the vagus nerve. They sort of go through the spinal cord route. But the same applies for all the vagus nerves as well. So yes, there's light sensors in fat. Who knew that? That's completely bonkers. I mean, it's a mouse study at this stage, but the researcher who did this, Richard Lang, said to me, it's very unlikely that this isn't sort of throughout the whole animal kingdom. And it's also probably likely that it has something to do with regulating metabolism. And because if you block these receptors in mice and then they can't get food, they can't call on their fat reserves. So there's something about it that they're required for knowing when you're starving and you need to tuck into your fat reserves. So it's that's a whole fascinating thing that we don't know anything about. And there's probably bigger fish to fry when it comes to managing our body weight, but it's kind of interesting to know that our fat sensing light might have something to do with it. Or even, I always go back to kind of all these esoteric statements that are written in the text of yoga, like in terms of a body of light and all these kind of things, and and try to make kind of like biological sense of things, right? What might they be talking about? Maybe there's something to do with the light and fat that you could do something. I mean, I don't know. They're always talking about making themselves disappear and all these things. Yeah, something to do with changing the fat, the chemical.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah. You should do a research on that, like yoga claim, like esoteric, like tantric text yoga claims, and try to biologically validate or invalidate them. That would be
I don't know how you'd go about doing that. That's the trouble.
No, you couldn't. Well, that's true. You couldn't validate them, but you could discuss. You could discuss them at least, and that would be very interesting, at least to me.
I worry that the answer might be never happened.
Yeah, right. Oh no.
I don't know. Call me a cynic, but
okay. Well, on that note, why don't we talk about your meeting with Sherat? And you had a little chat with him about prana, I think, and the breathing, right? Which is, really a shock, because I had no understanding before that you'd done Ashtanga or even yoga. And suddenly in the middle of it crops up Sherat. You're speaking to Sherat in London. So I was super excited. So, I know that guy.
Yes, exactly. I think most other people are like, who? Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it came about. I mean, I have to shout out to Clive and Mark of Ashtanga Yoga Guildford, because their teacher, Hamish Hendry, was hosting Sherat and his time in London. I think it's 2019.
Right.
And he was coming to London, and I had a ticket, and I said, look, can you make this happen? And so they did. And I had about 20 minutes chatting to him. It was really interesting, actually, because a lot of what he was saying was what I was hearing from other people. It's like, the scientific view and the yoga view sort of saying the same thing in different words, like you're talking about breathing, and what's coming from the studies is that when you breathe in through your nose, the air goes past the olfactory bulb, and that the brain is sort of breathing through your nose sort of sets the metronome for sort of brain waves across the brain. And this kind of makes sense if you think about it in terms of evolutionary, sensible strategies. So a lot of information comes in through the nose, through the breath. If there's anything scary or important or good food or whatever, you need to know about it. And so this sort of sets the rhythm of what's going on with the brain. Whereas, talking to Sherat, he was saying things like, you're taking energy from the outside in through your breath. So it's sort of saying the similar thing, but in slightly different words. And the nose is important. So yeah, the yogi's got that one right. It's important for all kinds of reasons, but for sort of, if you want to get your brain sort of, oscillating and as one, then breathing through your nose is kind of a good way to go about it.
But at least there's a corroboration on that level, albeit somewhat lighter than what I was suggesting.
Yes.
In more poetic, because they do use very poetic terms. And if you try and unpack these kind of, somewhat symbolic or poetic terms to try and come back around to what's being kind of like found out now through science.
Yeah.
Kind of intrigued as to whether they've got a completely different roadmap or whether they're saying the same roadmap in just using different language.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I think some of the things I struggled with from that conversation was that, the scientific way of looking at things is like, we don't know how this works. Let's get some data and see what fits. And we might be wrong, and I sort of struggle with a little bit with the kind of language of, well, we know this. It cures all illnesses and puts you back together and all that kind of thing. I was like, does it? Does it though? But yeah, on a lot of things, I mean, I think, things that humans have known about for thousands of years, some of them are right. Some of them, through experience, you got it right. But I slightly worry about the idea that we should take it all wholesale and say, well, it works because this guy said this a long time ago. And so we're just going to keep doing it. But yeah, maybe that's just me. I think, updating with new information is useful. And it's great when it all comes together and you go, well, okay, so yes, it makes you feel better and it makes you feel grounded. And here's an interesting reason why, because it's doing something to your brain.
Yeah.
So that's where I come at it.
Yeah, it's just, that's a whole other subject, I guess, kind of an argument of modern analytic traditions, which are perhaps we could call it, science is based on skepticism, right? And doing experiments to disprove, essentially, a hypothesis. Whereas, obviously, these yogis did make claims, like we see in many books, that yes, these things will cure ills and cause enlightenment to happen very quickly. So, but perhaps there's some kind of positive thinking.
It's a very different...
It's a different perspective of the world, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're all trying to, no matter what background you come from, I think everyone's trying to work this stuff out. And that's why I have a little bit of a, I've never sort of looked for a guru, because I kind of feel like we're all trying to figure it out. And I'll take what, and, when you speak to scientists who are at the top of their game, they'll always say, oh, I don't know, and so I don't really believe that anyone has the answers, because I don't think that's possible in one lifetime. So, but I think we're all trying to work this stuff out, and you speaking to different people with different perspectives is really fascinating, because then you can take what resonates and put it with what you've learned.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the beauty of all this modern podcast. So every second person. Have you got a podcast?
I have not got a
You
podcast.
haven't, or
No,
you're the only
that,
one that hasn't, you know.
I know I'm the only one. I used to present the New Scientist podcast, but that was a long time ago before
Did you?
podcasts were podcasts. Yeah. I've thought about it a few times, but yeah, I thought actually everyone's got a podcast. I'm not sure everyone
No, I think you could do a
needs
great
me.
job, to be honest. But it just, you know, in terms of listen to all the different interviews. Like last week, I interviewed Louise Newson about menopause, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
and you, and then an Ashtanga person, and so there's all this information that people could kind of listen to side by side to get different takes, and
Mm-hmm.
well, that's beneficial, but kind of sometimes confusing,
Yes.
Yeah.
That's life, though, I guess.
Yeah,
It's
well,
confusing. That's what sort of drives me as well. I'm fascinated to know, well, how does all this work? Why? So when I first worked in New Scientist, the tagline was for people who ask why. And that's sort of like, that was me at school. And that's everyone who works there, basically. It's like, why? How do you know? Why? Just because there's so much to learn.
I think there's something definitely we could push back on in modern yoga. Is this what you were talking about in the book about joint hypermobility and over flexibility and anxiety,
Yes.
and strengthening against anxiety in a sense, right? And
Yes.
so, would you speak a little bit about that? Because I definitely felt that in my own experience, I would definitely corroborate that in going to Mysore and being involved in very advanced yoga postures. We could call it gymnastics. I did feel that it increased my sense of anxiety when my joints, I mean, now I'm older and a lot less flexible, but I feel a lot more calm than when I was using my hypermobility to put my leg all over the place. And yeah, it definitely did have I felt a negative impact on my sense of, calm. And
that's interesting, because I asked researchers who research hypermobility and anxiety, like, can you sort of acquire it through becoming more flexible? And that wasn't there. It hasn't been studied. But in people who are naturally hypermobile, which is like 1 in 5 people, and probably quite a lot of yogis, I think, because you're attracted to things that you can do easily.
Self-selecting.
Yeah, totally. So the reason why the link is there is because if you're hypermobile, you have sort of lax of collagen in the joints, so they bend further than they might, than they sort of most people's do. But that also means that collagen is everywhere throughout your body, including in your blood vessels. And so the link to anxiety is thought to come because there's a reflex when you move, say when you stand up, the blood vessels in your legs constrict to make sure that the blood doesn't all rush to your feet so that it keeps this flow going. But if you're hypermobile and you have a sort of stretchy collagen, that doesn't happen as efficiently. So blood tends to rush to your feet, and then people feel dizzy, and then the heart. The only thing that the heart could do in that situation to keep blood pumping is to pump faster. And you may or may not be aware that's what's happening, but unconsciously that rise in heart rate is sort of being noticed and interpreted as anxiety.
You reckon?
And so so this is what Jessica Eccles, who does the research, and she's also hypermobile herself. And and it happens when people are in somewhere very hot. I mean, that might have played into what was going on with you. If you're very hot, the blood will rush to your surface of your skin to try and cool you down, but it might not come back as efficiently as it should. Or if you've eaten a big meal, the blood will go to your stomach and it will pull there. Yeah. And so this is the idea in Jessica Eccles' work, that if you can help people to interpret the rise in their heartbeat, to understand what's going on, and then not let it spiral into anxiety, then you can it doesn't change anything with your physiology, but it just change your interpretation of what you think it means, and it can help with the anxiety. Because you might still feel this horrible sensation, but you'll be like, okay, I just stood up too quick, or I'm hot, and then you can sort of put it in its box a little bit more.
That one, I reckon, I mean, just speaking, I mean, all we can do is speak on our own experience a lot of the time. It's a long way around to get to that answer, I think. I would go with the Occam's razor idea that literally, if you feel weaker, you feel like your body isn't held together so strongly, and that interoception, that feeling just affects your mind. You just don't feel so strong, that you feel looser, that you feel more open, your boundaries are somewhat less challenged. You don't feel so definitive and then when you strengthen your body, like I do weightlifting and stuff now, as well as yoga, you feel like, okay, I can, I'm stronger. Like if something happens or something crashes into me, literally or metaphorically,
yes.
I can resist it better.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's something in the strength piece for sure, because there's huge amounts of research going back to the late 80s that if you increase people's physical strength, not in a way that you can see from the outside, is totally an inside job, that tips over into a sense of what they call sort of self-efficacy, like which is basically the feeling of I can handle it, as you were saying. So increasing people's strength is a really good way, and very, you can't argue with the science. Has been going for a long time. That it genuinely, whether you increase your fitness or not, whether you increase the size of your muscles or not, it does have this knock-on effect on how you can feel. And this is an interoceptive change, because you're upgrading the signals sort of for the longer term. So Antonio Damasio, who's written, he was one of the key guys in this, he calls it the musculoskeletal division of the body. And so the messages that are coming from that are, it's fine, stand down, don't worry about it. So yeah, I mean, there's more than one thing going on at once, because we're all very dynamic, creatures at the end of the day. But there is a lot to be said for strength and for knowing that you can hold your own and hold your own body weight. And I found that, with yoga, things like, for example, I was out walking the dog and somebody else's dog got caught behind a fence and was in the river. And I just sort of hopped over the fence and yanked the dog out the river. And they were all looking at me going, what the hell? What are you doing? And I'm like, well, I know that I can do that. So why wouldn't I? So I think there's, it helps you in other ways.
Sense of trust and confidence in one's body. I think so many people kind of mention that in terms of how they feel better by doing yoga. They start, you
can do it. You can hold your own weight.
And especially, as you mentioned, also in other places. I think that in school, and we mentioned before in our chat that in school and stuff, basically school, really, right?
Yeah.
Unless you join an adult football club or something, you don't get any coaching in movement, really, other than sports. Perhaps it's changing now a little bit, but the kind of confidence in our bodies. Most people that I see kind of come to see me as to learn yoga, right? They often haven't done anything for years and years, and if they're not a sporty person at school or haven't joined some adult team, which is highly unlikely to be honest, or they're not running, because that obviously running is the main thing that people can do on their own other than yoga, or gym. Many people don't like gym, noisy, full of aggro guys, bros. It's hard to get a sense of oneself and trust in one's body, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's so many ways to do it that I think I'd love kids to be exposed to more things, because before sort of, I've always had one thing, that's my favorite thing, but I have lots of different ways. I'm a bit of a movement magpie. And, when I was living in London, my thing was trapeze, and it was a similar sort of feeling, because you can hang from a bar, you can get yourself up, and it's really satisfying, and then you can build a bit of artistry into it and sort of do some routines and stuff like that. But it's very possible to go through school coming out the other end and think, well, I don't like rounders, I don't like netball, I don't like hockey, I don't like football, so movement's not really for me, and then just leave that aside for the rest of your life, and then you don't have any clue of what you could possibly do with your body that you would love doing. So yeah, I would love for all kids to be able to, and all adults as well. I've got this sort of vague idea. I'd love to sort of set up some sort of ungym where people could come and say, okay, right, this week I'm going to try paddleboarding, and next week I'm going to try trapeze, and next week I'm going to try something else, just because there's so much you can do that isn't just going to the gym or joining a particular sporting club. You don't have to be good at it. Like street dance is a thing I've taken up recently. You don't have to be good at it.
Or even with gyms, just like me and my wife Teresa kind of fantasize about like a gym that's just like, well, one, light, two, kind of clean, three, doesn't have music, right? You can't have like bros grunting and strutting around, right? Just like some place which is more comfortable for people to go and do many things. And my wife likes to do like light circuits with where there aren't involving weights. So there should be like nice spaces that allow women to do those things as well. Or men. Also, on a more serious note, outside team sports, which is a certain cultural or sociological milieu, that ownership of one's body doesn't really get fed to us from a young age. Because if you're not going to be engaged with another person in a somewhat comparative or competitive kind of context, then your experience of your body is lacking then, right? You don't take ownership of your body, or only relate to your body in relationship to or in comparison to other people and their bodies. So perhaps there's something deeper to be said about that.
Yeah, so I've sort of, in a sense, I've sort of speculated, because you can't ever really be sure, that maybe this point in our history as a species, we're probably less sensitive to what's going on inside our bodies, partly because we're more sedentary. So, you'll become more aware of the signals from your body if you're doing something with your body. But if you're sitting and not breathing shallowly and your heartbeat's not really changing, you just, then nothing's really happening. Also, everything is so overwhelming stimulation from phones and screens and, life in general, that you can't, the way it works with your attention, you can either be focused in the world or you can be focused inside your body. And the ideal balance is that, you want to be mostly aware of what's going on around you and the people around you, but you also need to have that access to what's going on in your body, because it's important information, and then you can flip back to the outside world again. But if we're so drowned out by everything around us and we're not moving and so when nothing's changing on the inside, we can become very disconnected from our own bodies in a way so we're missing out on all this information that tells us about our relationships with others, because the basis of empathy is changes in your body affect changes in my body. We have a back and forth. We support each other, so we're sort of cutting ourselves off from that. We're cutting ourselves off from the knowledge that we need to self-regulate when the world gets scary, which it is most of the time at the moment. And so there's a lot that we're missing out on. And I think for the self-regulation bit for kids, I think is really important. So that's when, movement is really important for them at a young age, because if you don't have the experience of, oh God, I feel like I'm going to explode, go for a walk, come back, I feel better, then how will you ever learn that for the rest of your life, as some way to regulate yourself? So you sort of almost need to learn it from the inside. How to make that happen? I'm sort of working on it. I don't know how with the current sort of school system and the current way the working world works. I'm not quite sure how we change it up. But I think it's important to
I don't want to see you crying on TV like Jamie, having having tried to change the food situation, and now you're trying to change the movement situation,
and they're still eating chicken nuggets.
Metaphorically speaking.
Yeah. Well, the good news is we've got some kids doing video. We're doing sort of trying to get them alert in the morning for 5 minutes, and then after morning break they're doing some stretching and breathing, and then they're doing some sort of skills-based stuff in the afternoon, and the kids seem to love it. So that's the first step. So we're waiting for data to come in from a school trial that we're running, actually finishing tomorrow. So I'll be crunching some data. But it seems that the kids are up for it. The kids are up for it. So as long as it doesn't get in the way, there is room for it, I think.
Oh, it's so ridiculous getting children with all that energy that we have when we're kids just sit there for so many hours in a classroom.
But they're also very used to it as well now. And so there's a thing when we did a sort of an initial trial of movement in schools, and you'd ask the children, especially, you'd say, okay, so get up and do some stretching. Okay, how do you feel now? And they'd just say, tired. I feel tired. I need to, and so they hadn't got through that barrier. And I saw it with one of my son's friends when they were a lot younger. You drag them out for a dog walk and you say, oh, but my legs are tired. I'm like, they're just warming up. Come on, go. You'll feel better in a minute. But you have to have been exposed to that to learn that, to come out the other side. So I think that's it's a little bit worrying that.
Carolyn, that just makes me feel like old, and because I recognise now that those kids now they're not moving, are they? Because when we were young, maybe similar age, obviously when you were bored, go outside. My parents said that to me. I'm sure it's yours. Did you go outside and play? And there was no option. I mean, it took 40 minutes to load a game on the Spectrum. I mean,
exactly.
That would just be, and it probably wouldn't load. It would probably crash. So most of the time, you had to just take the ball between the horns, as it were, and go out and run around. And now I can't. I can't imagine all those kids sitting there just playing the games all day.
I mean, they do. I think it's not completely black and white. I think you can panic a little bit, but I mean, some kids aren't doing anywhere near enough. So what we've seen in the data from the kids we've looked at so far is like a minority of the class that are doing all the activity, and then the rest aren't. So, but we'll see. I'm trying to fix it. We'll see what we can do.
Well, kind of wrapping up, what about thinking out of the box? I really liked your stuff about the idea of low intensity exercise and neuroplasticity, walking. You've got the little anecdote of what's his name, Darwin walking around his garden. Do you want to say something about that? Because the neuroplasticity stuff is really interesting. How to use the body to affect possible changes in the mind while we wake up, and we often have good ideas. This kind of thing.
Yeah, so the Darwin story is interesting. So it's not, I guess it's not so much about neuroplasticity as about getting into the right zone for what you want, what kind of thinking you want to do. So what
Right.
Darwin would do, so he came back from the voyages of the Beagle, and he'd got all this, all these observations he'd had, and it took him a while to kind of put that all together into what we now know as a theory of evolution. And one of the things he did, he found London overwhelming. He had young kids. I mean, it made me laugh. I could just imagine him trying to think in his office, and the kids are outside the door. He's so he moved them all to the countryside, and he had these lovely grounds. You can visit them now. It's Down House. It's in Kent, and there's like a quarter of a mile path that he had built in his grounds, and he would call it his thinking path. And he'd go and walk around that, 4 or 5 times a day, and he'd sort of just think things through. And so the research that's been done on sort of moving and thinking sort of totally backs up what he was doing. So it seems to, when you're moving at an easy pace that's easy for you, and for some people that might be running, for some people that might be cycling, but basically something you don't have to concentrate on, that isn't taking all your mental energy, it sort of lowers activity in the sort of frontal bits of the brain, which keep us thinking in straight lines. And that sends the mind sort of a bit more, you can pick ideas from all over the place and put them together in new ways. So this is a particular kind of thinking that's important for creativity. And so it's been shown in experiments now. You send people out for a brief walk, and then you give them creativity experiments to do afterwards, and they are something like 60% more creative. They come up with better ideas, they come up with more original ideas, and it kind of spills over for like 20 minutes or so afterwards. So, we think now that people just spend their time sitting at their desk trying to think about stuff. It's much more efficient to go out and, use your body to put your brain in the right states for thinking creatively, and then come back and sort of have a meeting about it or whatever. So, so that's walking is a very underrated activity, because if you take up the pace a little bit more, and there's some really cool research about the rate of walking. If you sort of go for a bit more of a stomp, 120 steps per minute, which is a natural pace when you're walking briskly, people can do that. The heart starts to synchronize with your steps, and then in that state, you get a more reliable boost of blood to the brain. So that may be why when you've gone for a brief brisk walk, you feel a bit more awake and alert. So you can sort of use it. And there's other research about moving forward through space by whatever means. It helps, it makes you more likely, the future feels closer to you and the past feels further behind you. And so you feel you're making metaphorical progress as well as physical progress. So this idea of just going out for a walk, there's so many reasons why it's good for you and makes you feel better and less stuck in your ways.
Yeah, like the reason why people like running, and you interviewed the guy, the ultra runner in the book, and how, because it does. I mean, running does feel like you're moving away from the old and you're coming onto some optimistic new path, albeit hobbling with painful knees and
but in some ways, any way of sort of getting up and physically taking some action, it gives you the sort of the boost of, okay, I've taken the ball by the horns, I've done something.
Also a rhythm. I mean, what comes to mind when you speak on the walking is that you're getting into, with this low grade intensity exercise, getting into a certain rhythm and getting into a kind of trance state, almost like a very light kind of trance state, and how that affects, because obviously when you're thinking in a kind of normal, like I say, everyday mode, it's A to B thinking, like, okay, I need to do that, I need to do this to do that, blah, 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 silly little chores. Well, not silly, but all the stuff we have to do. And then, on the deeper level, existential questions about oneself, one's life, etc., they don't come through. Yeah, but if you get, all indigenous movements being based on cultural dance, really, getting into a certain rhythm. Yes. And once you do that, something else comes through, because it kind of unlocks a different part of your mind, doesn't it? It takes you away, but lulls you in a certain sense into a different, like a rocking a baby, into a different kind of mind state where other things can come through.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I really love, when I can get my ass onto the mat and going to do self practice, and and a leg class as well. You're sort of moving with other people, so you got the kind of this rhythm, and it sort of takes you away, and your mind skips off and does its thing, and when you come back, you feel much better for it. But there's also really cool research which I look at in Move, which is about moving in synchrony with other people. And so one of the ideas about why So it's been shown fairly conclusively that it helps you to feel more connected to other people. So if you get babies and you bounce them on your knee in rhythm to some music, and then you sort of, not babies, toddlers, and you put them down and then you drop something, they're more likely to pick it up and give it back to you than if you bounce them all over the place. So there's something about moving in synchrony with other people that's sort of hardwired into making us feel like a cohesive group.
Yeah.
And one of the ideas is that, it sort of messes with so proprioceptively where your body is in space, but you're also you're getting information from the outside world. If you're moving with somebody else, their movements from the outside match with your movements on the inside, and it kind of blurs the boundaries of where my body ends and where yours begins. And so we start to feel closer to each other when we move in time. So maybe that's something why, when it was COVID and yoga classes happened behind a screen, it's not the same special sauce as doing it in a room when you're all breathing together and you're all doing it together. And there's something in that synchronous movement that we've known for thousands of years. That's why people dance around campfires.
Absolutely. It's now the popularity of modern yoga is no coincidence. Just at the same time where we've lost all cultural kind of forms of movement, right? Like we don't have those folk dances anymore or whatever. And suddenly you got all these collective yoga classes where everyone's doing the set sequence together. And that's albeit somewhat of a coincidence, really, based on a Iyengar or Patabi Joyce coming over and saying, well, I've got too many students to instruct personally. It really works. It really works to give this kind of experience of oneself in a collective environment. What did you say anything about the sleeping? I mentioned the sleeping. Now I feel silly. I mentioned this because of sleeping and having the ideas in sleep. Was it you that said stuff about how
I didn't cover. Actually, in terms of creativity, so another time when this sort of sensible thinking in straight lines bit of the brain goes offline is when we're a little bit drowsy and we're dropping off to sleep, and so that is why our ideas come to us when we're dropping off. Also in the shower, because kind of the sound
rhythm of the drops,
sensory sort of deprivation in some ways, it sends the brain off. So there's lots of ways you can do it. You can have a beer as well, that does a similar. It's whether the ideas still feel good when you finish drinking the beer, I don't know, but there's lots of ways to take your sort of thinking sensible brain offline temporarily and harmlessly.
Yeah, perhaps it's almost as much as you can do that through understimulation, say the flotation tank. Mm-hmm. I feel as somewhat you're doing it with the shower, or perhaps with the yoga, a certain continuous overstimulation at a light threshold. Because if you're completely overstimulated, one feels there's a shutdown mechanism. The body just cannot regulate it, just shuts down, cannot process that information, and that gets somewhat stored, let's say, as trauma. But if you just lightly touch that area of overstimulation at a continuous level, at a continuous duration, then you're in a different state,
So there's a sort of a concept in sort of science and health called hormesis, where you do a little bit of what harms you actually helps. So the idea is that when you exercise, you're sort of stressing your body a little bit, but that kicks into action sort of repair mechanisms. So you repair the muscles, you make more blood if you need more blood. So by stressing yourself a little bit, it kicks in the repair. Whereas if you don't ever stress yourself, everything just gets a bit sort of flabby and gunked up. That's my way of understanding it anyway.
In scientific terms.
Yes.
Well, that's the homeopathic model, really, although we can't speak about homeopathy anymore, especially to an allopathic scientist. But but a little bit of what stresses you, then the body fights back. I mean, like caffeine. Caffeine actually often relaxes me, because it kind of raises you up a little bit. So somehow something in the body comes in to calm you down, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
Maybe you're not so sure about that one.
No, I don't know. I'm just thinking. I just written a lot about ADHD, and that's it's quite a common thing.
Same, using basically speed to actually relax people.
Stimulants calm you down. Yeah. It's true.
Well, maybe there is a germ to the homeopathic ideas.
I'm not going to say anything on that. I'm just.
I won't draw you out on that anymore.
Yeah.
Finish off then. What about your own movement? Because you mentioned going to do some natural movement training and going to do some different things and dancing in the kitchen. You like a little bit of dance and
I love a bit. I love
do you have any? And also the idea of the vagus calming movements, or another point in the book you mentioned. I can't remember her name now. Amy, someone who with the idea of standing in certain postures to make you feel confident. No
Amy
different.
Cuddy. Yeah,
Amy
Amy
Cuddy,
Cuddy. Yeah.
although
So her work, yeah.
somewhat discredited. There was some
Well,
good ideas in it. Yeah.
so Amy Cuddy's work, the kind of power posing, which was a
Yeah.
real big thing for a while. So what happened with that is basically she got very famous on the research saying power posing made people feel more confident, more powerful. And their research suggested that it was because of a drop of cortisol and a rise in testosterone. So, and then people tried to recreate those studies and they didn't find the same results. Well, they found the same results in that people felt better, but they didn't find the same results with the testosterone and cortisol.
Hormonally.
So what she was I think unfairly beaten to the ground, like saying, she now researches bullying, unsurprisingly. But you know, so maybe the mechanism didn't stand up.
Yeah.
But the idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the idea of,
you know,
that
hunch posture, you feel like that.
We don't know why, but we know that it happens. So, so what do I do? So I have he doesn't look like a very active dog right now. There he is.
Oh, he's lovely. You mentioned you had a collie. Oh,
yes. Collie crossed with New Zealand sheepdog, so even more. It's like a collie on steroids. It's ridiculous. But anyway, so yes, he needs a lot of walking, so I do a lot of walking. I like dancing. I've started taking up a dance class, as much yoga as I possibly can do. I'm a bit of a magpie. I like in the summer paddleboarding, cycling, anything. I just need to work. And if I'm working at home, which I usually am, then I tend to sit on the floor a lot. So the good thing about sitting on the floor is that you have to get up. So you're then strengthening your legs every time you get up. Just silly things like, stretching up to get things, just being a bit more aware of moving the body and trying to keep it going. And even if I'm not going to a regular yoga class, I'll find myself in the evening sometimes sitting on the floor and sort of, doing the odd bind, bit of January.
Bit of January.
Bit of Mary, a bit of that. So that's one thing I have. I've definitely lost my binds a little bit actually. But anyway, I know that it's there, and I know that it feels good. So yeah, I guess I'm always moving in one way or the other.
It wasn't your turn, but you mentioned the movement snacks, and I like that idea because I tend to kind of feel for years, this is my movement window for the day, and the rest of the day, F all, and latterly, as I get past 40 and stuff, one has to try and do more stuff. You can't just do that. I trying to think about, that's true. Like, a 10-minute walk up, you don't need to walk up the stairs, but the obvious stuff really. You're on the floor a little bit, you're moving up, and just introducing these little snacks to your day. So you're not just like, I'll get all the movement on the mat or in the gym and then nothing for the rest of the day.
Else.
There's most unhelpful, actually.
Yeah. I quite often, you're sort of, if sort of thinking, I sort of just do that, and partly because I'm a fidget, not because I'm thinking I must now do a movement snack. But I think, just having that in mind of just doing something, it doesn't matter what, I quite often stick my leg up on the banister when I'm thinking about something. I don't know. I'm just a fidget, but yeah, just getting stuff in when you can, it's not going to do any harm, and it might be really helpful.
This is the last question that comes to my mind. What got you into it? What got you into interoception? Did you have a particular reason, or just you loved? I know you loved writing essays. Weirdly, and you love science. But anything particular for you about movement? I mean, you said you weren't really a mover at school. No,
I wasn't really. Although I did then apply to be a PE teacher, to do PE teacher training at university, which I think my PE teachers, had they known, would have been completely shocked and dumbfounded. But the reason was because I couldn't bear the idea of a job where I had to sit still. So that was where it came down with that. I'm going to do that. But what got me into researching it, I think it became clear to me that anything that actually did change the way I thought and felt had to do with moving. And I think yoga had a big part to play in that. I was going, very regularly to morning practice, so 3 to 5 times a week at one point, going to any workshop I could get my hands on. And I was thinking, okay, well, what is it? What is it there's more to this than just endorphins makes you happy, So is it the stretching? Is it the core workout? Is it the strength? Is it the breathing? What is it that makes this such a transformative thing? And it turned out all of those things, all of the above. So yeah, yoga was a big part of it. And then obviously from the movement changes the way you think, because it changes something on the inside. That led to interoception, which turned out to be a whole bigger subject than sort of movement and the mind. It's everything to do with pain to eating behaviors, to whether you feel safe in your body or not, and mental health, physical health, the whole thing. So it's just this whole new world that's very well known about in science circles, but not really in general sort of chat. I kind of think of it as like where about 15 years ago, the microbiome was something that science journalists talked about and wrote about, and that it was all in the science journals, but people outside of that didn't have a clue. Now it's like in the center of everything. Everyone knows about the microbiome and the gut-brain connection. And I kind of feel like interoception is going to be the next one of those, because it really changes the way we think about what it means to be ourselves. Our sense of self is rooted in the body, our mental health, our physical health. And I think it's changing.
How do you think people will take it? Because I mean, the microbiome seems to come down to just increased sales of kefir and kombucha.
Yeah.
So how do you think that the interoception might be let's say popularized to its lowest common denominator?
Yeah, I dread to think. I do, because when it comes down to anything to do with the microbiome, I think, as far as I can tell, the advice seems to be eat a lot of fiber and a diverse diet. You don't need to take any supplements, because the bacteria will turn up if you give them what they need to eat. So the people have cashed in massively. I think there's a huge amount of cashing in to be done on the vagus nerve as well, which is far too early to go anywhere near that. I'm sure it'll be popularized, and I'll be gnashing my teeth about that for some time to come.
I could have made 10 million off that.
I'm just talking at a festival in a couple of weeks' time, and they've asked me to talk about how to spot spurious health claims, some red flags to look out for. So there's a lot of it about, but there's also some really good stuff coming through in science, and I think there's a lot of hope going forward for things for problems that we haven't had good answers to, like fatigue, like pain, like eating issues, whether over or under eating, mental health disorders. I think this kind of holistic idea of what the mind is, and the body's role in that, I think, can only be a force for good as long as people don't squeeze profit out of it and rip people off.
That's going to happen anyway. But honestly, I mean,
it won't be me though.
It wasn't you, and your book specifically, both of them actually really move and in a sense excellent reads. Everyone, please have a little look at them, and are very optimistic. They really gave me a lot of. They're very positive, just a really positive read, and really, really enjoyed them. Like one of the best things I've read recently. So we'll put those in the show notes.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I do think there's a lot to be positive about. Things are moving on, and we're understanding things better, and that can only be a good thing. That's
what comes through. So thank you very much for being a guest. I really had a lovely flowing chat with you. So it's been a total pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been lovely.
Cheers.